Hi everyone, today we're going to make some bread. I apologize if the microphone isn't so great. I'm just using my phone for this, and we are working in my cramped kitchen. But I wanted to take this opportunity to actually make the bread and show you the video, being that we're not going to be able to do it in class together. So here we go. First thing I want to talk about is the yeast. I am using fresh compressed yeast. And it says that one cake, this 2-ounce block, is the equivalent of 3 packets of yeast. So all we need is 1/3 of this packet. I've already pre-sifted the flour and pre-measured out all the ingredients. So this should run smooth. It should. We'll see what happens. Okay, so I just need to open this up. And this yeast is live. It doesn't need to be activated. It doesn't need to be soaked in water first. It does need to be refrigerated. So what we do, we just measure about 1/3 of it, and I'm going to take that. It's kind of crumbly, so you can see that it crumbles from the block that's just a compressed block. So wanted to show you I had measured out a cup of sifted flour first. Let me just get the rest of that yeast off there. So this can go back in the refrigerator. There are pros and cons to using this yeast. One of them is you don't have to activate it first. What I like to do is just take a whisk and try to break it up. Mix it in with the flour. So you might, if you've worked with the yeast packets before, you're probably surprised that this doesn't have to go in water. Like 90-degree water for 10 minutes with a little bit of sugar to wake the yeast up again. These yeast are awake and ready to party at all times. So I just mix them up a little bit. We're doing a simple yeast bread recipe today with some eggs. For color and flavor, it's very similar to the recipe that is in your lab manual. Okay, so this is 1 cup of flour that I mixed the yeast into. Here I have a 1/4 cup of sugar and a tablespoon of salt that I mixed already together. I'm just going to dump that in. And we're going to just incorporate it all. Still trying to break up those lumps if there are any of the active yeast. So it should look something like that. I'm just making sure that we're still recording. Very good. So once that's all incorporated, we are going to just make a well. And I actually felt that there's still some yeast that are in larger chunks. I'm going to try to break them up a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to make that well. And the recipe calls for 2/3 a cup of milk, which I have in the microwave here. And the milk is supposed to be warm to 100 to no more than 110 degrees. So I'm just going to take the temperature. I want to put it in for a few more seconds. Again, while I'm waiting, I'm going to give this another quick stir. If there's any lumps there. So let's see, give the milk a stir. I don't know if you can see that. We're at about 107. Someone on the street is mowing their lawn. I guess you can hear that too. They just stopped. So 107 degrees. We want to make sure it's not too hot. Because if it's too hot, our yeast will die. And we don't want that to happen while we are relying on them to make the bread. Because it is the yeast's metabolism of the sugars in the sugar and in the bread of the carbohydrates that is going to provide them with food and energy, and in return they're going to produce gas, carbon dioxide. And it's that carbon dioxide that is going to be released into the dough, and the gluten in the flour in the dough formation is what's going to hold that gas so the dough will actually expand. I'm going to use my spatula just to give us a quick mix. I do have other spatulas. I just grabbed this one. It's my my favorite one, but it did lose a battle with a food processor many years ago, but it still works. So we're just going to give this a quick incorporation just to make the dough uniform. So right now I'm kind of just folding it all together, scraping the sides, making sure that's all mixed uniformly. I could use the whisk for this part actually. Okay, now we are going to add some butter. That fat is going to add a little bit of texture and mouthfeel. So we add that butter in. It's 2 tablespoons of butter, room temperature. So we add that. Let me get my spatula here to get all of it off. I'll scrape out the rest here. So 2 tablespoons of butter, softened at room temperature. Give that a whisk, just to incorporate. So this is the mixture that we're looking at so far. This is what we're working with. Here I have 2 eggs beaten. We're going to add basically half or 1 or as close to 1 as we can. We're going to give that a stir. This is why I like the whisk for this part. I could have kept using the spatula, but the whisk does a better job, in my opinion, of breaking up the egg. So that's whipped up. Now we're going to add our second one in right there. Get it all out. Go back in with the spatula. So now you could really see why the whisk is preferable for this part of it. You could use a stand mixer or a hand electric mixer, but I was trying to keep the demonstration as simple as possible. Okay, so that's pretty well integrated. We are done with our whisk. Now here, I have 2 more cups of sifted flour. And I forgot to mention that this is unbleached flour. I would have used bread flour, but there was no bread flour left in the store, and you can't find bread flour anywhere right now. But this recipe is good because it actually calls for all-purpose. The difference between the flours is the amount of protein. So cake flour has the least of protein, all-purpose is somewhere in the middle, and bread flour has the most protein. And you'll find throughout the lecture that protein, the gluten, is what gives bread and cakes and cookies and all baked goods the characteristic texture. So the bread has more protein, so it makes it a little bit chewier compared to a cupcake, which you wouldn't want to be. You want it to have a softer, more delicate crumb, the inside texture. So I started off again with that 1 cup sifted flour. Here's 2 cups. I'm just going to add about half. And use good old handy dandy. Who says handy dandy? But I said it, and I'm not going to edit it out. I'm just going to use the spatula to start folding this in. As you do this, you want to try to use a spatula to make sure that you scrape everything, the mixture, the dry dough, the liquid, everything off of the bowl itself. You don't want it to, you want to try to minimize the amount of dough that you have sticking to the bowl. Because the more that you have unmixed and just sticking to the bowl, is the less it's going to make it into your bread. Okay, that was probably a little bit less than half. I guess we're doing it in thirds this time. But again, it was just 2 cups. So I'm mixing this up. It looks a little scary sometimes, like how am I ever going to get all of this dry flour incorporated into the dough? But don't be scared. Just keep going. That's why we follow recipes. So just trying to incorporate this here. Again, you can see I'm trying to scrape everything off as much as I possibly can off the sides to get it into my dough mass. All right, I think we're ready to dump the rest in. Might as well grab this one too. Okay, so we're going to continue to fold and incorporate our flour mixture. Now, this part can be a little intimidating if you've never done it before. You see how this is all dry flour, but it's still wet inside. We have to do our best to get that as mixed up as possible. So if you have to, just keep spreading it around, keep folding it over itself, and you just keep doing this. And every time, the dough mass should pick up a little bit more of that loose flour. something to that effect. So I'm trying to get as much of all of the flour as possible out of the bowl and integrate it into this dough. Okay, I scraped the sides. I have my spatula cleaned off. What I'm going to do now is take some leftover flour, just flour my work surface, and dump it out. Okay, so I'm looking at my watch and I want to make sure I spend about 8 minutes just kneading the dough, adding a little bit of flour as I see fit. The dough's a little sticky in my hand still. So what maybe I'll just sprinkle a little bit more flour on top. What I'm looking for is for it to not stick to my work surface as I pull it up, as I continue to knead it and fold it. So what we're actually doing here with the kneading, again, I still feel it's a little sticky, is let's still stick it to the table here a little bit, so we have to, it's not ready. There we go, so we definitely need a little bit more flour. We are forming the gluten strands in the dough. And you definitely, or generally, don't want to spend more than 8 minutes doing this. So picking up a little extra flour along the way is okay. I'm just going to use my dough cutter to scrape up some of the loose dough. And just continue to work with it. Alright, so it's still a little sticky, but it's not sticking to the table anymore as I work with it. So here's my dough ball. If you look at the cutter, it's got a ruler on it. So we are about 3.5 inches high. What I'm going to do is I have a greased bowl here that I'm going to put the dough in, and a damp cloth that I'm going to cover it with. And this is going to proof just for 10 minutes, just an initial proof. Set it to proof. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, so the dough has proofed. We're gonna flour our work surface. That's a lot of flour, but it's okay. This is the initial proof. Take it out. We're gonna need our moist cloth in a little bit. Dump the dough down. So it was about 3.5 inches before. That's gone up to about 4 inches or so. And I'll be back in a second. Okay, so we took the dough out, the dough ball, cut it into 3 strips. I rolled each one out as evenly as I possibly could. So what we are going to do now is try to braid this. So with an emphasis on try. So I just need to get my bearings here. I think we'll do. So just trying to make it neat as we work down. There you go. So now we have, I guess that looks like a braid. That's not so bad. I think I'm going to try to make it into a, we have to somehow join all the ends together, which I should have tried to do off camera, but you're going to see this happen live or recorded live. That should go here, and this one should go under that, I suppose. Then tuck it under slightly. So that is our braid. Well, I don't like this end. So I'm going to try to tuck it there. Try to form it. Into as nice a ring as possible. It's a little wonky right there, but we'll tuck it in. I think we got it. So what happens now is I take my greased baking sheet and I'm going to put the dough, hopefully it stays in the ring that it's in, and I just rearrange that like that, make sure that tuck that back underneath. The ring might have been a little ambitious for this braid. That I've never done before, but it's okay. So what we do now is we take our damp cloth and it goes into proofer for 60 minutes. And what's going to happen while it's proofing, so let's set the timer here for 60 minutes. So what we should see happen while this is proofing is the dough should double in size, because it's basically, since the yeast is a living organism, it's like sending them on a trip to the spa where they're going to hang out in the steam room or sauna for a few hours and really get their blood flowing and metabolize all the carbohydrates, all the sugars, and release that CO2. So what we should see is the dough about double in size. So hopefully that's what happens. See you in an hour. So, funny story, I actually had a bit of an emergency come up while the bread was in the proofer with 1 minute left. I don't know if you noticed from the time lapse that I took it out with 1 minute to go and I just snapped some photos. So, what I ended up doing, being that I couldn't put the bread right into the oven, I put it in the refrigerator. So, what I want you to think about is, why would I put the bread dough that's still hidden right here? Let's give it the old reveal. This is out of the refrigerator. Why would I put the dough in the refrigerator instead of leaving it in the proof box or out at room temperature if I wasn't ready to bake it yet? So the question again is, I wasn't able to bake it when it was done proofing, so I removed the bread from the proof box and I put it in the refrigerator, instead of leaving it on the table here at room temperature or leaving it in the proof cabinet. So just something to think about. Why would that be the option instead of just leaving it in there or leaving it on the counter? I put it in the refrigerator. So what we're going to do now is just hit it with a little bit of egg wash. This is a whole egg. So I'm just going to brush it, try to go along the braids. Actually, I found that it worked better last time if I go from the outside in. That way I cover the side all the way and get into the seams, if you will. So from the outside to the middle, just working my way around like that. The reason why we do the egg wash is to add to the shine. It's going to add a shiny color, or a little bit of a shine to the color, I guess I should have said. And it is going to help make the top look that golden brown that people are looking for when you have fresh egg bread. So if you think it looks good now, just wait until you see it out of the oven once it's browned on top. Just going to continue to do the egg wash here. Just making sure I get the sides, try to get in these creases here at the braids. That way everything shines. Just paint it on. the last little bit on the end there. Maybe more on this side. And that's it. I think we're pretty good. So here's the egg washed dough. It's been proofed, then put in the refrigerator after proofing. Now we're ready for baking. I'm going to put it in here. I made sure that the rack wasn't in the bottom position because that would make it burn or get too brown on the bottom. So I'm going to set it to bake. And if you remember from our other lab, I have it set to convection because I want the air to circulate. I want the fan to blow to move the air around. So we're going to go to 350 for 20 minutes. That's what we're going to start with. So we're going to go in the oven, 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. It might come out a little bit sooner. As soon as the top starts to be golden, that's when I take it out. And also I'll be able to tell when it's done because of the aroma coming out of the oven. The other thing that I almost forgot what I was trying to say is about halfway through I take it out and I turn it around just to make sure that it's even. So here we go. See you in about 20 minutes. Okay, so it actually looks to be done with 8 or so minutes to spare. So I'm going to take it out. Let's take a look. Get my oven mitts on here. So what we're looking for, I'll shut this off. It should sound hollow when you touch it, when you tap it. And it's still pretty flaky inside, so we know that it's not raw inside. It should be fully cooked. And you see, the egg wash gives it that nice brown with a sheen to it. That nice color. So what we're going to do is take this wire rack and we are immediately going to just transfer it over to the wire rack. Just like that, and let it cool before we even touch it. Which is the hard thing to do because everyone wants to eat bread as soon as it's out of the oven. So I'm just going to look at the bottom here. See, it's not overdone, it's not burnt. It's pretty, looks like it should be pretty flaky inside. So that's it. This is our yeast bread that we made. This is basically the same recipe or a very similar recipe to the one that we would have done in lab. So the ingredients are simple enough that you could try this at home if you want. I'm sure we all have a little bit more free time being that campus is closed. So here's the bread. Again, it's a yeast bread. It's important to remember how the yeast works together with the gluten in the dough to rise, to get this formation. Basically, the yeast metabolizes the carbohydrates, and in return, or as a result of that metabolism, they release carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is that gas. It's those gas bubbles that expand. So if we just put the yeast in water and the dough or added heat without, or in flour, I guess I should have said, the bubbles would just escape. The CO2 would just escape. And there's another experiment in our lab manual, which I'm not saying to do. Oh wow, my watch thing just broke. The little holder there. Anyway, the okay, I'm back. I distract myself all the time. Anyway, so there's a lab in our manual that involves putting a packet of yeast in water and then putting a glove or a balloon on top of the container, and you could watch the glove fill up with air. That air is carbon dioxide, which is released from the yeast. The same effect is happening with this bread, except we could eat the bread and we're not going to eat that rubber glove. Which, that wasn't that funny either, but again, I'm not editing this, so it is what it is. Basically, what's happening is, when we knead the dough, we form the gluten, the protein strands get stronger, and that allows the elastic framework of the dough itself, of the bread, of the flour dough. So it allows this dough mass to expand in response to the yeast releasing the CO2. So think of the gluten in the dough being like the walls of a balloon, and the yeast releasing the CO2 as basically like the helium tank that you would hook the balloon up to fill up that balloon. So the yeast create the CO2, and that expands the walls of the dough as the gluten allows it to stretch. And it allows it to stretch without exploding. And overproofing is a problem where you could actually allow the dough to stretch so much that it would be like popping your balloon and then it just collapses on itself. But all in all, I'd say this one turned out pretty well. I'm very happy with the result. So here it is, yeast bread.